and going solo again on this one. So, unfortunately, for this episode, I don't have a guest, but I just kind of wanted to showcase my new podcast set that I have been working on since quarantine, just to finally get this podcast going. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while, but I felt like it took like something like this for me to have more time at home to finally have time to brainstorm on furniture and just getting a nice setup at home. We ended up putting this TV up. One of my friends helped me put it up and making sure the measurements were right. I hope you guys have been enjoying these episodes. For this one, I want to talk about public speaking, communicating. I think is a very difficult subject for a lot of people. It's not the easiest thing to do. I think when you share your opinions, when you put yourself out there, it's really easy to be criticized. And when I think about the friends that I have that are also barbers, that also are educators, but their pages are more about, finished products, you are less of a target to be judged for. Communication and public speaking is something that I've actually struggled with my entire life. And it usually starts from childhood and how we grow up. And for me, for people who don't know me that far back, because I think most people in the hair industry didn't know that old version of me. They knew the better version of who I am today. Oftentimes, a lot of people's struggles are pretty similar. It starts off the same, at least. The difference is some people are willing to kind of dive into it deeper, to challenge those things so that they can become better at it and not a slave to the fears that are holding them back. So if you flash back to my childhood, so throughout my family, they're traditional Cambodian. They're from the mainland, and they came here probably a few years before I was born. And the one thing that I went through as a kid, we never really had to think for ourselves. All of our decisions up until, honestly, my second year of college, I never had to think about other than yes or no. There was no reasoning for why I wanted to do anything. It was very disciplined on going to school, getting good grades, going to college, the natural things that most people think about when they're thinking about what they want for their kids' future. And it used to get to a point even when we're going to McDonald's, for example, and this was probably about junior high, and my aunt was like, "Hey, can you ask the lady for some ketchup?" And I looked at her and I was like, well, why do I gotta ask? Like, why can't you ask? Like, this is how crazy it was to think about my communication skills as a person, that I could not ask the McDonald's worker if I could get some ketchup. And what was really bizarre is that I didn't even know what was wrong until I got into college, maybe closer to like fourth or fifth grade. I remember making Mother's Day cards, and I come home, I find my aunt, and I'm like, hey, auntie, can you give this to my mom? She's like, no, why, you give it to her. And I was like, it was just like an uncomfortable feeling. Growing up, we didn't hug, we didn't say I love you, we never spoke about our feelings. It was just kind of like, hey, this is what you're gonna do, and you follow suit, and that's that. Come back with good grades. If I got good grades, it's just, okay, great, do it again. There was no applause for any of those moments in my life. And for the most part, I did naturally pretty good in school. Up until the end of high school is when it started to shift a little bit. I think this is the age where I felt like I wanted to have friends. School was just taking over, and I just felt I was starting to break into like finding who I am and understanding myself more. And this was about senior year, I would say. So senior year, I came out of the closet. I told my mom that I was gay, and that broke a couple things in my family that really made them a little distant from me at the time, because they didn't quite understand what it was. I think even for my grandma, who was kind of like a second mom to me, she in her head thought that it meant like I wanted to have a sex change or something like that. But that is nothing I've ever wanted to do. It was just purely that I was interested in women. And so we cut communication off as a family. It was kind of like we just existed together for about 2 years till things returned back to normal. And this is about So that was senior year of high school. The same process with my mom. It's just kind of like we come and go. Hey, this and that. There is no emotional kind of like, there's no emotional feeling for anything that we're doing. So that leads me to the next. So the next thing happens is, let's see. So now I'm in college. The first year, I followed kind of like the idea of what my aunt wanted. And the crazy thing that happens, and I believe that everything happens for a reason, is me and my aunt had gotten into a fight. And during our fight, she was like, you know what, I don't care what you do at school, do whatever you want. And that was the first moment in my life. I was about 19. And for the first time ever, I started to have thoughts. And it was just a different feeling because I've never been in a place before where I had the power to kind of decide what I wanted to do next. It was my second year of college. I was like, you know what? I don't even know if I want to do business because that's what the previous year was about. My aunt wanted me to do business admin since I didn't know what else I wanted to do. So we went into that. I dropped out of those classes and then I pursued psychology purely because I think naturally I kind of was obsessed with the idea of learning about the behaviors and the situational psych about life and people. Like, why do people do certain things? Like, that was something I was just interested in all the time. So I decided to take a couple courses in that to kind of see if that's the path I wanted to go on. I did that for about a year. And then maybe half a semester later is when I actually got into doing hair. Also, the psychology classes, I actually, at the same time, jumped into an interpersonal communications class. This was the first sign that I was able to get into that really allowed me to understand the conversations I would have with myself, the conversations I'd have with my parents, my friends. It taught me about how I do this with everything around me. So 6 months later, I enrolled into hair school. I was like, you know what? At this point, I started bleaching chunks of my hair and playing around with that on the side. I started cutting my hair. Back then, there was like, scene hair was kind of big. So I had like this super choppy top layers and the bottom was like really long. And I remember getting into school. From there, we did all the training, passed state board. Then I go into the work field and I get into a shop. And the first year, I'm testing different places out. I try a chain, I try a couple salons, trying to assist there because that's the way it's supposed to go, like they always tell you in school, okay, now from here you're going to assist for somebody for so many years, learn from them, and then you get your own chair and then you go from there. But I took a different route. I actually realized that I didn't want to do women's hair after the first year. I tried it. I couldn't connect to it. And by my second year, I jumped to a barbershop. I found a really cool one by my house at the time. And then phase 2 came for my communication to evolve. Now I'm forced to talk to customers that are brand new, that are walking in. I'm forced to create conversation, And for the first year, I'd say, I was probably cutting hair and not talking to them other than asking them what they wanted. And I remember my boss coming over and he's like, hey, Soph, like, you got to talk to your clients. It looks really, really uncomfortable from here. And I was like, what do I talk to them about? Like, I don't know. It was something I remember. I remember this like it was yesterday because the fear that it brought me to having to like have these, what I felt were going to be awkward. So I'm like, okay, all right, I'll take your note. And I tried, and one thing about me that I think really helps is that I'm actually really competitive. So I took it more of a challenge of like, please do this. And when people tell me I can't do something, I think it makes me want to do it even more. And I think that even stems from even like my family from not wanting me to, don't play sports because that's a boys thing. So I played sports my entire high school and junior high and a little bit of elementary school. Or don't get tattoos, they're just for boys. So when the opportunity happened for me to be able to make that choice of wanting to get one or not, I just kind of went ham and then ended up liking it because I think, I'll save that tattoo one for a different story, but there's an entire process to that whole thing as well because it's definitely a very spiritual journey for me through life and through a lot of experiences. And then next thing is don't get piercings, don't cut your hair off. That one probably That one probably messed my mom up the most, was cutting off a part of my hair. She couldn't forgive that one as much. And let's see, that takes me to now. The thing with being in a barbershop is that you're cutting potentially up to like 17 people a day. That is a lot of practice each and every single time to start a new conversation with someone you don't know and try to find some middle ground where you guys can have a fun conversation. And the reason why I started doing it was obviously because my boss had encouraged me to do it, and I didn't want to let him down. And also a part of me was like, like, you got to do it. Like, let's just tap in and try. So I tried, and then I started seeing something that was happening. People were giving me bigger tips because we were connecting better. And so instantly that encouraged me to be better at it. So when you're in a barbershop, you're cutting so many people a day. This is giving you a whole lot of opportunity to practice that exercise of just talking and thinking of things to talk about. So I would start with, the basic questions. Where are you from? Where's your family from? What's your background? From there, what do you do for work? How did you get into your type of work? How did you find this shop? Who did you want to go to? Like understanding just a little bit about them. And from there, I was able to kind of come up with at least like a little script of my go-to questions. And then eventually one of these things would lead into a conversation that we could have for a while. 10 years of talking to strangers in shops, 10 years of learning about people you don't know, you're completely in their space. I've had a lot of practice now, and just the same way that you learn how to do a haircut, this is how you build on your communication skills. So when people tell me that they're fearful of like communication, I always think about this journey for myself, that it's very difficult and oftentimes like really, really uncomfortable. But now going through it and working through something that has bothered me for a really long time, I feel like I have more control of my life. I feel like I can make better decisions because now I can express better what I feel on the inside and, putting it out there when I need it. It's made me better being in the barbering industry and exercising my ability to conversate with not only clients, but, once I started traveling and doing hair and working for a big company, like you have to know how to talk to people as well. And that's not just people that are, coworkers. You got to learn how to talk to CEOs. You got to learn how to talk to different bosses of different places. And being in barbershops in general, I think helped me really to adapt to the different types of people, which also made me exercise communication in different ways. I was able to learn how to blend myself in with, people that were a certain style to super conservative, to super artistic, to whatever it was. I felt like I could gauge my conversation in just how people came off, because if I'm conversating closer to their style, you build kind of a comfort in the communication itself. And then once I started traveling and doing work on stage, it's pretty much similar. You're just now conversating on stage with people and knowing how to kind of float the conversation in between multiple people, which is also hard when you're cutting hair and cutting at the same time. And you're balancing not only the physical things, but now you're balancing the thoughts that go into, different things. So I want to say that it's something that I really hope people would tap into more and practice. A couple things that you guys can do is, when you're cutting hair, ask your clients if you could just take a moment to explain what's going on, and that will help you practice your speaking, because sometimes when it's all in your head, it doesn't come out the same way. And the more you practice what's in your head and being able to articulate that, it kind of keeps a nice flow where everything is together, versus like, I thought about it for so long, but then once I talk, I choke, I forget words, like it happens. And it did happen to me on stage. And this is how I learned, was through those mistakes, those errors. The one thing that I kind of want to leave you guys with is, everybody, we work in a saturated industry. It's like many creative outlets. There's a lot of photographers that are working against each other. There's a lot of videographers, there's a lot of barbers, there's a lot of hairstylists, but people are having trouble with finding the thing that matters most, that's going to allow them to separate themselves from the masses. And the one thing that really helps is your ability to communicate that. And if that is through blogging, then do blogging. If that is through podcasting like this, but just audio only, then do that. And then the hardest one, I believe, is video. Video, being in front of a camera, learning how to process and speak at the same time. That's difficult, but I feel like that is the fastest way to get your message out, because people can read your expression. People can, hear the tone of your voice. They can just get a pretty much solid view of who you are when you are talking. And so I feel like it's the most intimidating, but it's the best fear to break, because everything that we do is surrounded by digital media. So last year, I had the opportunity to have James Charles as my client. And if you guys don't know who that is, James Charles is a huge YouTuber, huge Instagram artist, huge on TikTok. He literally kills it in all his social media platforms. And I was cutting his hair, and, I don't like to really push myself into asking for questions for stuff like that. I try to keep it as perfect. And I just remember one day I asked him, and I'm like, hey, do you mind just like looking at my page and just whatever you think off the top of your head, like what I could do to improve my social media, or just like my connection to my audience? So he quickly goes through it. He looks at my phone. He goes through my stories. He looks at my page. He's like, you have really great content and you have really great quotes, but why don't you talk about it? And that was his exact words. Why don't you talk about it? Why don't you do more videos about who you are? I think people want to hear the person behind all this really great stuff. And at the moment, I was like, I was like super intimidated, but I know there is some truth to what he was saying, because I already knew that if it was something I feared, it was probably something that I needed to overcome, because with going through a process like that, you unlock something even better, and it makes you better as a person, as an artist. So I remember going home that night after I cut his hair and I left, and I looked at my page and I was like, damn, that's a lot of quotes. So I went through and I cleaned up. He kind of gave me some tips on like how to clean up my page. And, whether he knows it or not, that was a piece of advice that really stuck to me, because he has such successful pages on social media. And at the time, I want to say he was like 19. So super young, he's killing it. He knows what's relevant to right now. The crazy thing too is that what people don't understand is, I was just talking to one of my friends this morning, and we think that we need this like perfect attempt to talk, to read a script or whatever. Like, oh, I don't want to put it out unless it's perfect. But it's the imperfect things that happen that allow people to connect to you. Because if it was just so perfectly cut and dry all the time, there is not a lot of relatability to that anymore. Like, people want real, and the more real you are, the better that connection will be. I started to notice that shift recently when I started to talk more about my personal stories. Sure, it's awkward as hell because you have to talk to a screen that's not talking back to you, and then you got to learn how to like listen to your own voice and not be annoyed at your own voice, or the tones that, at first you're like super monotone, or you're too excited that it sounds fake. So you have to learn how to find that balance that allows you to be who you are without feeling like it's not you. And, another thing that I also thought that I remember seeing is that really helped me with this thought was that, we're thinking about these things where it's like, okay, it's got to be perfect. I got to say it correctly, or it's not going up. And I remember going over to James' house another time to do his hair, and he was doing a post, and I swear he had probably rehearsed it maybe like 15 times before he actually posted it. And it was just like a quick story about his new YouTube video that just went up. And when I saw that, I was like, holy shit. So it's okay, it's okay to rehearse it a couple times. You're not going to gain it on the first, even 10 times. If a successful YouTuber is taking 15 times to do a post about an announcement, to post their YouTube video, what does that mean for someone that doesn't do it often? It gave me some perspective to not feeling like, okay, if I don't get it in the first 5 tries, maybe it's not for me. You know, this was a way for me to think like, no, like you got to really put in the attempts so that it comes out the way you want it. It doesn't even matter how many times. I mean, think about how many pictures you guys all got to take before you find that one good one. I would probably go through close to like 50 photos to find one decent angle that I liked. And photos are one thing to get correctly, but videos are another because you can't hide anything. And so that's why another thing I think is hard is video. And another tip I have, if you want to, get better at communicating on camera and talking on camera, is to record yourself and listen to it, because there's no better judgment than what you see in the camera, because it's catching everything. It's catching your tones. Are you saying certain words as fillers to like a lot of people say Once I started catching myself saying it so often, I learned how to take breaks. So something as simple as that, because we do it out of nerves. And I had taken a couple Toastmaster classes before I joined the Babeless team. And during the Babeless team, we did a couple exercises as a group to pretty much kind of analyze our own communication skills within our jobs. So it was really cool to kind of do it before I got into being a public speaker more often on stage, to being on stage and still being nervous going through Toastmasters to analyze my communication even more. And the one thing that happens is the communication keeps evolving to different levels. Like as you do it, you'll realize there's levels to speaking. And depending on what kind of gig or thing you get into, it can change. So before, it was communicating through being on stage, answering questions, cutting hair, multitasking, talking to the people on stage as well. Like you're balancing a lot. To now I have to rehearse events. So if I'm part of events, people are more likely to listen to a message that someone is talking about versus me just posting a flyer. You get a super different outcome from speaking about it than you do from just posting a flat drawing of the event that's happening. What I have to do now is I have to read scripts. I never thought there'd be a day where I'd have to read scripts, but when you start working with different brands, that is something that you also have to be able to adjust to. I didn't know how to do it. I knew how to talk to like my audience, and I've had practice with it on a daily basis when I am just regularly on social media. But to also add a brand and making sure that you are representing them well as yourself, and just, following the script of what's supposed to be said, that was different, because I felt like I started having to rehearse lines to make sure that it aligns with, whatever brands that I'm working with at the time. Oh, and then I wanted to finish off with this. This is the last part that I kind of wanted to say, is there is a uniqueness about every single person that's even watching this. There are things that you've been through that make you different from me. There's things that I've been through that make me different from you. And although we do the same things, we're two separate types of people. But the only thing that separates us is our ability to communicate that into the world. I just want to leave you guys with that. I know we talked about that earlier, but that is the one thing I want you guys to really think about, because whatever career path you're in, this applies to it as well. Communication is the way that we unlock so much of who we are and how we share our gifts into the world. So please challenge yourselves and, really go for it, because you really don't know what's waiting for you on the other side. And the only way to figure out is to try, So thank you guys. And I hope you guys enjoyed my segment on today's topic, which was communication. I'll see you guys next time.